Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. Before we dive into this heartwarming story, hit subscribe so you'll never miss the most courageous dog tales we share every day. There are whispers in every town. Whispers of what's lost, what's forgotten. I know those whispers well. I've lived with them for years, the kind that settle deep in your bones and steal your peace. They say hope is a fragile thing, easily shattered by darkness. They say the system works, eventually. But sometimes, when you've seen enough, when you've lost enough, you learn that hope isn't found in grand pronouncements or official reports. It's found in the quiet defiance of those who refuse to give up. And sometimes, just sometimes, it wears fur and walks on four legs. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting Harmony Creek in hues of orange and violet. Children's laughter usually echoed through Willow Creek Park, a symphony of innocent joy. But tonight, the air was thick with a silence so profound, it felt like a scream caught in the throat of the town. Because tonight, a voice on the local news channel uttered words that would forever scar the heart of Harmony Creek. 9-year-old Maya Jenkins has been reported missing. The broadcast cut abruptly to a commercial, a calculated move, as if the local authorities sought to contain the burgeoning panic to maintain an illusion of order. The fear was palpable, a cold dread that clung to every breath. Parents clutched their children tighter, neighbors peered through curtains with a chilling new apprehension. A girl. Gone. Just like that. The headlines the next morning confirmed what everyone secretly feared. Search for Maya Jenkins comes up empty, and already hushed conversations hinted at a narrative being carefully spun. They're calling it a runaway, a voice crackled through Dave's precinct radio, trying to keep the lid on things, for the town's image. Amidst the growing despair stood Officer Dave Miller, a canine handler, a black man whose quiet demeanor was often mistaken for aloofness, even disinterest, by those who didn't truly know him. But beneath his calm exterior beat a heart fiercely committed to justice, especially for the voiceless, for those dismissed by a world too quick to judge. Dave had seen too much, been on the receiving end of too many dismissals, to ever give up on anyone. And beside him his partner James, a Labrador with a coat the color of twilight, and eyes that held an ancient, almost sorrowful wisdom. James wasn't the fastest, didn't possess the flashy athleticism often celebrated in canine units. Some, whispering behind cupped hands, even called him slow or past his prime. But beneath that calm exterior lay an intuition that defied explanation, a deep sensitivity that made him unique. Dave saw it, always. He understood what it felt like to be underestimated, to have your abilities questioned, simply because you didn't fit a preconceived mold. James, with his unwavering gaze and quiet determination, mirrored that understanding. When others rushed, James paused. When others gave up, James lingered. And sometimes, Dave knew, that silent persistence was all it took. The initial search was a blur of flashing lights and frantic, desperate calls. Volunteers, teachers, even local teenagers, armed with flashlights, combed the dense woods, peered into forgotten sheds, yelled Maya's name until their voices grew hoarse. But as night devoured the lingering daylight, and a biting cold settled over Harmony Creek, the voices faded, the lights dimmed, and hope, like dying embers, began to extinguish, one flickering flame at a time. Dave was on hour 14 of his shift when the call came through. Another missing child, another frantic parent, another ticking clock. He looked down at James, who sat like a statue beside the cruiser, tongue curled, ears perked, a silent sentinel. James always knew which door to pause at, which shadowed closet to stare at, which overgrown bush held something more than just leaves. It was a sense that transcended training, a profound knowing that Dave had learned to trust more than any official report. They arrived at Willow Creek Park at 6:42 p.m. The scene was calm, but the tension was a physical presence, heavy in the air. Media vans, their satellite dishes like hungry eyes, lined the park's edge. A volunteer coordinator, his face etched with exhaustion, handed Dave a laminated map of the search radius. "She vanished right after school," the man explained, his voice strained. "Witnesses say she was on the swings, alone. Then, nothing." He pointed to the base of a brightly colored slide. "Her backpack was found here." Dave nodded, his jaw tight, and clipped James's leash. "Let's get to work." He gave the command, a soft but firm word, and James lowered his nose, weaving methodically along the dew-kissed grass, around the park benches, towards the older, denser trees. For 15 agonizing minutes, James circled, sniffed, turned back, a tireless pattern. He paused at a rusted chain-link fence, then, with quiet certainty, he sat. "Wind," Dave noted. his voice barely a whisper. Something. James moved again, a new urgency in his gait, this time heading directly towards the crumbling creek bed that snaked beneath the park. A concrete storm drain mouth, choked with moss and rust, opened just ahead, a dark maw in the earth. James stopped, his body rigid, staring intently at the opening. His tail was low, ears stiff with an unseen focus. Then he whimpered. Most canines bark, a sharp, alert sound. James, in moments like these, mourned. It was a sound that tore at Dave's gut, a deeper, more profound communication than any bark. Dave stepped forward, his heart pounding, and peered into the pipe. Nothing but inky darkness. A search supervisor, a seasoned veteran with a weary expression, appeared behind him, frowning. Already checked it, Miller. Small drainage tunnel, just runoff. Doesn't go far. James thinks otherwise, Dave replied, his voice firm, unwavering. He knew the dismissal in the supervisor's tone, the implicit belief that a dog's instinct couldn't possibly surpass human logic. They tried to pull James away, but the Labrador was unyielding, a statue of quiet insistence. Every time they called him, he returned to the same spot, his eyes locked on the dark void. By midnight, most teams, weary and disheartened, had packed up their gear. A cold, relentless rain started to fall. Maya was still missing. The next morning, the headlines confirmed everyone's worst fears, plastered across every local paper. Search for Maya Jenkins comes up empty. At the precinct, Dave stared at the corkboard map, the pins mocking him. James, curled beside his boots, paws tucked, eyes alert. Every few minutes, James looked towards the door, then back at Dave, a silent question in his gaze. "You still think she's there, don't you, boy?" Dave asked quietly, the question as much for himself as for his dog. James didn't move, his focus absolute. Dave grabbed his coat, the weight of unanswered questions heavy on his shoulders. They returned to the park alone, under the pale, watery light of early morning. No news crews, no volunteers, just the damp leaves clinging to the pavement and the vast, empty silence. James leapt out of the cruiser before the engine even cut, a black streak of determination. He went straight to the pipe. There was something about James's posture, rigid, unblinking, not merely alert, but pleading. It was as if the dog wasn't trying to point at something, but rather begging Dave to simply believe him. Dave knelt, the damp concrete cold beneath his knees. "All right, buddy," he murmured, his voice laced with a renewed, fragile hope. "One more time." He leaned into the pipe, shined his flashlight into the suffocating darkness. Still nothing. Then, a flicker. He thought he saw movement, a trick of the light perhaps. He blinked. Nothing. He turned the light off, waited, holding his breath, listening to the drumming of rain and his own pounding heart. Seconds stretched into an eternity. Then it came. A tiny, almost imperceptible sound, like fabric scraping concrete, and then, a hand, small, trembling, impossibly pale. It slid out from behind a bend in the pipe, fingers reaching, barely moving, a desperate silent plea in the echoing darkness. Dave's heart froze in his chest. "Maya," he whispered, a name torn from the depths of his soul. "Paramedics, fire, rescue, back up!" He radiated all in, his voice raw with emotion. He crawled partway into the tunnel, speaking gently, guiding her with his voice, a beacon in the suffocating dark. When they pulled her out, she was soaked, shivering violently and barely conscious. Dehydrated, bone-chillingly cold, but miraculously alive. Wrapped in a foil emergency blanket, her eyes fluttered open, and she whispered, just loud enough for Dave to hear, "I heard the dog." "What?" Dave asked, leaning closer. "The dog," Maya murmured, her gaze fixing on James, who sat beside the stretcher, licking her wrist gently as the medic worked. "He was there. I stayed awake 'cause I heard him." James's tail moved once, a soft, triumphant thump. They later learned she'd been followed after school by a man in a dark hoodie, a figure who had vanished into the shadows before anyone noticed. She panicked and ran, squeezing through dense brush, finding refuge by crawling into the storm drain. She'd gotten lost in the winding darkness and, exhausted, fallen asleep. When the rain began, she stayed put, terrified that if she moved, she'd never find her way out of the subterranean maze. She said she felt utterly alone, like no one was coming, until she heard the faint whimpers and rustling outside the pipe. It was then, listening to James, that she knew someone hadn't given up. The press, of course, didn't cover that part. The footage showed the dramatic rescue, the ambulance, the crying parents, but not the silent canine who stood vigil at a hole in the ground when everyone else had packed up. Not the quiet whimpers that woke a girl from fading sleep and called her back to life. But Maya would never forget. Neither would Dave. And neither would James. The local paper heralded it as a miracle. Lost girl found in storm drain thanks to canine hero. Pictures ran front and center. Maya, small and pale, wrapped in a silver emergency blanket, her eyes wide with a fragile hope, and James, sitting beside her like a statue, the perfect portrait of calm and loyalty. But by the next morning, the miracle was already being dissected, picked apart by a system that preferred clear answers over ambiguous truths. News vans rolled out, their hungry cameras seeking new crises. Reporters moved on to the next fire, the next political scandal, leaving Harmony Creek to grapple with its uncomfortable relief. And while Maya was recovering at the hospital, while her parents wept in the hallway and thanked every god they could imagine, questions began to circle, insidious whispers, creeping doubts. She must have wandered in there herself. Why didn't she yell sooner? Maybe it wasn't an abduction at all. Are we sure she didn't make it up? Officer Dave Miller heard it first, an insidious current flowing through the precinct. A heavy manila envelope appeared on his desk, simply labeled, Maya Jenkins, Internal Review. Inside were cold-typed reports, an analysis of the timeline, commentary from a behavioral analyst from the state capital, Salem. The phrase possible fabrication or trauma-induced confusion was starkly underlined. Dave stared at the page for a long, agonizing moment, the clinical words a direct assault on the raw truth he had witnessed. Then he looked down at James, curled protectively beside his boots, tail lightly flicking, his eyes closed in apparent peace. She didn't make it up, Dave said softly, his voice heavy with conviction. James opened one eye, that knowing gaze meeting Dave's. Dave knew that look. We're not done yet. A few days later, Dave visited Maya again at the hospital. She was awake but still quiet, fragile. Her parents were there, polite but worn down, their exhaustion a tangible weight in the small room. The air felt heavy, as if everyone was bracing for something. Blame, perhaps, or just more agonizing questions. Maya didn't speak much, but when her eyes landed on James, a spark ignited within them. She motioned for him to come closer, a tiny, almost imperceptible gesture. James, sensing her need, trotted to her bedside and rested his head gently on the mattress, a silent anchor. That's when she whispered, her voice barely a breath, "He came back." Dave knelt beside her, his heart aching. "You remember what happened, Maya?" She nodded slowly, her small head barely moving. "I ran. A man. He was wearing dark clothes. I think he was following me." "Did you see his face?" Dave pressed gently. She shook her head. "No, just boots and his voice. He told me to stop." Dave felt his chest tighten, a familiar knot of anger. "And that's when you hid in the pipe?" "I wanted to wait until he left, but then I got lost," Maya explained, her voice gaining a whisper of strength. "It got dark and I fell asleep, but I heard James outside. He was the only one." She paused, her eyes, too old for her years, meeting Dave's. "I knew I wasn't invisible anymore." Dave typed up a full, detailed report, documenting every word, every nuance of Maya's testimony, and turned it in. It was filed, quietly, without fanfare. No further questions were asked from the department. The official word remained: no surveillance footage, no physical evidence of an abduction. They clung to the narrative of a child running from fear, a misinterpretation. Case closed. But Dave knew better. The truth, like a persistent shadow, lingered. So did James. Dave returned to the park alone, the storm drain now covered with temporary fencing. The official investigation had concluded, but for Dave, the scene still felt profoundly wrong. Not the park itself, but the edges, the overlooked spaces. A stillness hung in the air that didn't sit right with James. He was on edge again, not barking, but his body language spoke volumes. A low, focused watchfulness. Dave let him lead. They walked past the manicured edge of the park, through a tangle of overgrown brush and into a wooded area that wrapped behind a silent storage facility and a seldom-used maintenance road. About 100 yards in, James froze. Then he lowered his head, his nose working furiously, sniffing in tight, focused circles. "What is it, buddy?" Dave asked, his voice hushed, his eyes scanning the dense undergrowth. James stopped beside a weathered tree trunk, where the grass had been mysteriously flattened. Next to it, something small, incongruous. A crushed juice box. Dave's stomach churned, a cold wave of dread washing over him. It was the same brand, Rainbow Berry Blitz, that had been in Maya's backpack. He knelt down, his fingers hovering over the evidence. "You're saying she made it this far, James?" James wagged his tail once, a single deliberate thump against the damp earth. They searched for another hour, and James, with his uncanny ability, found more signs. A footprint, partial but undeniably large, pressed into the soft earth. A torn piece of vibrant fabric, snagged on barbed wire near a forgotten fence line. Dave photographed everything, every minute detail, careful not to disturb the fragile clues. It wasn't nothing, not to him. But it wasn't enough for a formal case, not by the department's rigid standards. That night, under the cloak of secrecy, he brought the burgeoning evidence to his trusted contact, Dr. Lena Hayes. Lena, a sharp, empathetic forensic psychologist, had left the city PD after years of battling bureaucratic inertia and the emotional toll of the job. She understood the unspoken narratives of trauma better than anyone Dave knew. "Looks like she was chased," Lena said, her brow furrowed as she reviewed the layout and Dave's photos. "She didn't just run and hide, she was being hunted." Dave nodded, the words echoing the cold certainty that had settled in his own gut. "But no one believes it." Lena took a slow sip of her coffee, her gaze piercing. "They don't want to believe it, Dave. You open that door and suddenly you've got a predator operating in a suburban park, right under everyone's noses. You think the mayor wants that headline? You think the Chamber of Commerce wants that kind of panic?" Dave looked away, the bitter truth stinging. "So we do nothing." Lena slid the juice box back across the table, her eyes softening. "No, Dave, we keep looking. Off the books." James and Dave went back every night that week, their silent crusade unfolding under the watchful eyes of the moon. Each time, James led them to something new, something that defied the official narrative. A faint scent trail near a derelict utility shed, a rusted flashlight tucked beneath a pile of branches bearing faint smudged prints. A section of chain-link fence, bent open and crudely tied back together with zip ties, indicating a deliberate, repeated passage. Too many coincidences. Not enough concrete proof for a warrant, for official action. Dave documented it all, meticulously building a file at home, a testament to the truth that the system refused to acknowledge. If the department wouldn't take it seriously, he'd make sure someone did. And then, on Friday night, James did something he hadn't done since the day they found Maya. He sat in front of a seemingly innocuous pile of rocks, his body tensed, and whimpered, a low, mournful sound. Dave knew that sound. With a growing sense of dread, he moved the rocks aside. Beneath them, hidden in a shallow dugout, was a torn black hoodie, too small for an adult, too large for a child. Inside the pocket, wrapped in a plastic bag, was a burner phone. The battery was dead. Dave held it up in the flashlight beam, the cold metal a chilling weight in his hand. "Got you," he whispered, a grim triumph in his voice. Back at his house, Dave charged the phone using a universal cable. It powered on. No contacts, no text history. But in the gallery, there was a single, blurry photo. An image of the Harmony Creek Park sign, time-stamped for 2 hours before Maya went missing. Someone had meticulously scoped the place. A chilling prelude to an unseen act. Dave's fingers clenched around the phone. He called Lena, the urgency in his voice undeniable. "You were right." By the next morning, Lena had worked her magic. The photo had been traced to a disposable email backup, which in turn was linked to 3 other burner devices. These devices had been used in reported loitering incidents across the state, always outside schools, daycares, even public pools. Whoever this person was, he had been traveling, watching, meticulously planning. And now he was gone. Dave walked into the station Monday morning, the burner phone a silent, damning piece of evidence in his hand. He dropped it onto the captain's desk, the dull thud echoing in the quiet office. "You need to reopen the case, Captain." The captain frowned, his gaze narrowing. "Miller, where did you get this? You know the rules." "Off the books, sir," Dave replied, his voice calm, resolute. "James tracked it. You understand this isn't proper chain of custody. Any evidence obtained this way could be thrown out." "Chain of custody didn't find Maya," Dave snapped, the words raw with the frustration of the past few weeks. The room went quiet, the tension palpable. Dave straightened, meeting the captain's stare. "I'm not trying to be a hero, Captain, but we have a pattern. We have a person out there who isn't done." The captain leaned back, his expression unreadable. "I'll elevate it quietly, Miller, but don't go rogue again, is that clear?" Dave nodded once, his gaze unwavering, then turned and walked out, James moving silently, faithfully at his side. That evening, Dave visited Maya again at the hospital. She was stronger now, her small face often lit with a hesitant smile. When she saw him, she didn't hesitate. She ran up and hugged James, burying her face in his fur. "I told Mom I want to be like James when I grow up," she said, her voice muffled but clear. Dave grinned, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. "You mean strong and quiet." She nodded fiercely and brave. James nudged her hand gently with his nose. She giggled, a sound that filled the room with fragile joy. Back home, Dave updated his board. Now it wasn't just one red pushpin, it was 6. 6 towns, 6 parks, 6 girls who'd gone missing and been found quickly, shaken, but miraculously unharmed, and all 6 towns had been visited by one distinct black SUV, captured on grainy local gas station cameras. Dave pinned the photo of the vehicle to the center of the sprawling map. James lay beneath the board, watching, waiting, his eyes never leaving the pattern, because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. James stood at the edge of the map in Dave's living room, staring up at the board as if he understood every pin, every line connecting the dots of darkness. 6 pushpins marked 6 towns, 6 girls, 6 near misses, and 1 elusive black SUV. Dave Miller hadn't slept in almost 30 hours, his mind a relentless churn of possibilities. Coffee didn't help anymore, it just made his hands shake faster, his thoughts race even more frantically. He had a folder stuffed with grainy security cam screenshots, timestamps, terse police notes, and unofficial tips scribbled in blue ink, details gathered from sources he couldn't name. But still, no name, no face, no concrete suspect beyond the chilling evidence. Yet, he glanced down at James, who sat quietly beside him, his tail twitching almost imperceptibly, like a clock hand waiting to strike the hour. James was always attuned to the unspoken, the invisible threat. "You ready to find him, boy?" Dave asked, his voice low, the question a quiet prayer. James stood, his gaze locking with Dave's, a silent answer, a renewed commitment. The black SUV had been last seen in a town called Meadowbrook, just under 2 hours east, a quiet stretch of rural highway, mostly orchards and long-haul truck stops. The local cops had casually chalked it up to a random vehicle just passing through. But Dave, after weeks of living in the shadow of this unseen enemy, no longer believed in random. He packed James into the back of his unmarked Explorer, the vehicle humming quietly, and headed east just before sunrise. No sirens, no backup, just a man and his dog chasing something the system, in its rigid adherence to rules, had decided not to see. They arrived in Meadowbrook by 8:15 a.m. Dave didn't stop at the local police station. He couldn't risk revealing his unofficial presence. Instead, he headed straight to the last confirmed sighting, the parking lot of a dusty convenience store near Route 39. The clerk, a tired woman with kind eyes, remembered the SUV vividly. Slick black, tinted windows, guy didn't come in, just sat in the lot for a while, real still. "Did you get a plate?" Dave asked, his heart thumping. The woman scratched her chin, a flicker of suspicion in her eyes. "Nope, no front plate. Kinda shady, to be honest. Gave me the creeps." Dave pulled out his phone, showed the clerk a blurry cam still from his file. "That's it, ma'am? That the one?" "That's the one," she confirmed, a shiver running through her. Dave and James canvassed the area for an hour, a quiet, methodical sweep. James sniffed around the paved lot, his nose a focused instrument, then circled towards the back, where a muddy drainage ditch separated the asphalt from a dense line of unkempt trees. There he stopped. Dave knew the signs. Ears forward, body stiff, tail low but alert. "Got something, buddy?" James moved forward, slow and deliberate, every muscle in his body focused on an invisible trail. The faint scent led them deeper into the brush, over a bent wire fence, and through a section of woods that suddenly opened into a stark clearing. In the center, like a decaying tooth, sat an old barn, abandoned, half collapsed, its rusted tools still clinging precariously to the rotting outside walls. James paused near the barn door, his body coiled, then barked once, a sharp, piercing sound that shattered the quiet. Dave drew his sidearm, the cold metal a stark contrast to the humid air. The inside of the barn was cold, smelling of damp earth, mold, and, unsettlingly, gasoline. Old stained tarps covered something in a far corner. James growled, a low guttural rumble that vibrated through the floorboards and moved decisively towards them. Dave, his heart hammering against his ribs, pulled one back. Beneath lay a set of large plastic storage bins. One was filled with discarded fast food wrappers, a sickeningly mundane detail. Another held neatly stacked zip ties and rolls of silver duct tape. And the third contained children's clothes. Dave froze, a wave of nausea washing over him. A small, pink shoe. A faded red backpack covered in worn stickers, chillingly similar to Maya's. He took photos of everything, his hands steady despite the tremor in his soul, careful not to disturb the grim evidence. James barked again, sharper now, a frantic edge to his voice. At the very back of the barn, hidden behind a sagging bale of hay, was a trap door. Dave's breath hitched. He opened it, revealing a crude, dark tunnel. Not long, maybe 15 feet, roughly dug into the dirt, reinforced with splintered plywood. It was a place of shadows, a place of unspeakable secrets. James, however, wouldn't go in. He sat at the entrance, his whole body trembling, and whined, a sound of profound distress. That was enough for Dave. He backed out of the barn, his heart racing, the horrifying realization of what this place was slamming into him. He called Lena, his voice tight with urgency. "You're not going to believe what we just found. I'm sending you the location and photos." He took a deep, shuddering breath. "This guy's not just moving around, Lena. He's planting. He's creating safe spots, hidden prep zones." Lena's reply came quickly, her voice grim. "Predators sometimes do that, Dave. Stash houses, hidden prep zones. It's worse than we thought." Dave nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "Yeah," he whispered, the single word heavy with despair. "It is." Dave wanted to stay, to stake it out, to wait for the monster to return and face him in this den of horrors, but protocol and a deeper gut instinct told him to lock it down and walk away. They needed a net, a carefully coordinated strike, not a wild shootout fueled by righteous anger. He flagged the location anonymously through a task force contact, hoping that would keep it under wraps just long enough for the federal gears to start grinding. Then, he and James drove back to the main road, the silence in the Explorer heavy with unspoken dread. Dave stopped at a gas station to fill up, the mundane act a stark contrast to the horror they had just uncovered. As he stood beside the pump, the scent of gasoline mingling with the metallic tang of fear in the air, James let out a low, guttural growl from the back seat. Dave looked up, his hand automatically going to his sidearm. Across the street, parked beside a row of mailboxes, was a black SUV. The windows were dark, like vacant eyes. The engine was running, a low hum of concealed power. No plate. Dave's heart slammed against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat. He reached for his radio, then stopped. They didn't have jurisdiction. They didn't have a warrant for this town. They didn't even have probable cause for this vehicle, not officially. But they had James, and James wasn't blinking. His focus was absolute, his body vibrating with a primal certainty. Dave decided to trust the dog. He pulled out of the station, making a casual loop through the sleepy neighborhood, then parked strategically behind a bustling taco truck, its vibrant lights a stark contrast to the darkness of the SUV. From his vantage point, he had a clear view. He killed the engine, plunging them into quiet. "Okay, buddy," he said quietly to James, his voice barely a whisper. "Let's see who this guy is." For 10 agonizing minutes, nothing happened. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then, the driver's side door opened. Out stepped a man in a nondescript hoodie and a baseball cap pulled low, medium build, faded jeans, clean sneakers, no visible weapon. He walked around to the back of the SUV, opened the hatch and pulled out a large, heavy trash bag. Dave squinted through the dim light, his mind racing. The bag looked dense, almost awkwardly heavy. The man carried it behind a small, dilapidated storage shed at the back of the lot, disappearing from view. Dave got out slowly, his movements deliberate, silent. James followed, moving low and quiet, a shadow at his heels. They crossed the street, staying tight against the chain-length fences and industrial dumpsters, blending with the shadows. At the corner of the shed, Dave peeked, his breath held tight. The man was kneeling, a small, collapsible shovel glinting in the faint light, digging furiously, burying the bag. Dave raised his phone, his hand steady, and took a burst of photos, the silent clicks barely audible. Then, he stepped out, his voice cutting through the night. "Sheriff's Department. Don't move." The man froze, startled, his head snapping up. For a split second, their eyes met, and in that fleeting moment Dave saw not fear, but a cold, calculating fury. Then, the man bolted, a sudden burst of speed. Dave reacted instantly. "James, track!" The dog launched forward, a black missile, gaining ground with astonishing speed. The man made it barely 50 yards before James, with a powerful lunge, caught his leg and brought him down hard. A sharp yelp escaped James's throat as he stumbled, but he held fast, his grip unwavering. Dave was on them moments later, cuffing the struggling man with practiced ease. By the time backup sirens wailed in the distance, Dave had already retrieved the bag from its shallow grave. Inside were photos, dozens of them, not just children but playgrounds, schoolyards, parks, a chilling, methodical collection. Some photos were recent, others years old. None of the children in them belonged to the man now cuffed and panting on the ground. The man was taken into custody under suspicion of stalking and child endangerment. He refused to speak, demanding a lawyer, but the photos alone were enough to pique serious federal interest. Dave sat outside the precinct that night, the humid air heavy. James curled protectively beside him, his head resting on Dave's knee. "Lena called," he murmured, stroking James's fur. "She said, 'You did it, Dave.'" Dave shook his head, looking down at his loyal partner. "No, Lena, we did it." He leaned closer to James, his voice a raw whisper. "He did." The next day, Dave visited Maya again at the hospital. She was stronger now, smiling more, the fragile hope in her eyes now a steady flame. When she saw him, she ran up and hugged James, burying her face in his fur, a pure, unadulterated joy. "I told Mom I want to be like James when I grow up," she said, her voice muffled but clear. Dave grinned, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. "You mean strong and quiet?" She nodded fiercely. "And brave." James nudged her hand gently with his nose. She giggled, a sound that filled the room with quiet triumph. Back home, Dave updated his board. Now it wasn't just one red push pin, it was 6. 6 towns, 6 parks, 6 girls who'd gone missing and been found quickly, shaken but miraculously unharmed. And all 6 towns had been visited by one distinct black SUV, captured on grainy local gas station cameras. Dave pinned the photo of the vehicle to the center of the sprawling map. James lay beneath the board, watching, waiting. His eyes never leaving the pattern, because this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Dave Miller didn't want the commendation. He'd seen enough shiny plaques gather dust in police departments. After the black SUV was impounded, its sinister secrets now locked away in evidence, and after the FBI quietly swept in to take over the multi-state surveillance case, someone in the mayor's office decided the town needed a good headline, a clean wrap-up. They gave James a ribbon and a plaque. They offered Dave a staged press release, a forced smile and a handshake. He took none of it. What Dave wanted was a name. What he truly craved was proof. Irrefutable, undeniable proof. That this man, now sitting in federal custody, stubbornly refusing to speak, hadn't just been watching kids. Dave knew, with every fiber of his being, that he'd done something worse. He wanted to know what was missing from the narrative, not just what had been found. He knew there were more ghosts out there, more stories untold. Back home, James wasn't sleeping well. The quiet, watchful dog now paced the hall at night, a restless shadow. He whined near the basement door, scratched at the windowsills, staring into the darkness longer than necessary, his ears twitching at sounds only he seemed to perceive. "He knows something's not done," Dave told Lena on the phone, his voice heavy with shared burden. "It's not just behavior, Lena. He feels it. He's telling me there's more." Lena didn't argue. "Dogs like James," she replied, her voice soft with understanding. "They're like tuning forks for trauma. He might not know what's wrong, but he knows something is still out there, and he won't rest until it's brought to light." Dave rubbed his forehead, the exhaustion a dull ache behind his eyes. "The guy isn't talking, won't give up a single location. What about the maps we found? Every one of them led to a dump site, hidden gear, no victims yet." James barked sharply the next morning while Dave was reviewing his case files, the muffled sounds of the morning news a distant hum. It wasn't just a bark, it was a summons, an insistent demand that pulled Dave away from his scattered notes. Dave followed him into the hallway. James stood frozen, his nose pointed intently at the floor vent, a dusty metal grate. He gave a soft, pleading whine, then gently tapped the vent cover with his paw, a gesture of desperate urgency. Dave crouched, the metal cold beneath his fingers. Old. Something was definitely below. He grabbed a screwdriver from the toolbox and pried the cover loose. What he saw made his stomach lurch, a sudden wave of ice-cold dread washing over him. Tucked deep into the dark, dusty duct, like someone never wanted it found, was a small, fabric-covered book. He pulled it out, wiped away the accumulated dust, his fingers trembling. It was a child's diary. The name on the first page written in careful, childish script. Sarah D. The date, October 12, 2016. It was old. Far older than Maya's disappearance. Dave brought it to Lena, his hands shaking slightly as he handed it over. She took it, her movements slow, deliberate, flipping pages with the care of someone unwrapping a fragile, ticking bomb. "This girl. Sarah," Lena whispered, her voice barely audible. "She talks about being locked in a place. About hearing footsteps and voices outside but never seeing anyone. About someone who left food but never let her out." Dave's hands curled into fists, his knuckles white. "Was she ever reported missing?" Lena ran the name through national databases. No matches. "But the handwriting is real, Dave. The emotions in these entries are undeniably real. There are too many details for this to be fiction." And then, in the very back of the diary, a small, faded drawing. A simple stick figure of a dog, with the heart-wrenching words scrawled beneath it. "I heard him, but he didn't find me." Dave felt his chest go cold, a wave of profound sorrow washing over him. "This wasn't Maya," he murmured, a dawning horror in his voice. "No," Lena said softly, her eyes filled with shared anguish. "This was someone before her, many, many years before." Driven by this new, chilling revelation, Dave went back to the barn near Meadowbrook, now officially locked down with federal tape, a sterile crime scene. He used a contact to get inside quietly, the official seals momentarily broken for his unofficial mission. James sniffed the edges of the room again, a focused, relentless search. But this time he did something different. He went to the back wall, a section that seemed solid and unremarkable. He sat, he whined, then with a gentle, insistent paw, he scratched at the old floorboards. Dave, his heart pounding, knew that sign. He pried one up. Another hidden space, another crawl tunnel, even smaller, more confined. Inside, a threadbare blanket, more empty juice boxes, and a set of tiny, dusty ballet slippers. Dave's breath caught in his throat, a sharp, painful gasp. They had missed her. Ah! They had been so close, and they had missed her. The grim discovery sent shockwaves through the federal investigation. They called in ground-penetrating radar, sent cadaver dogs, not just for search but for grim recovery. They found 3 more dugouts like that, scattered across the property. All empty, but bearing undeniable signs of having been lived in for extended periods. The case was immediately reclassified. Serial abduction. Dave stood on the edge of one dark hole, the silence heavy with the ghosts of forgotten children, and whispered, "How many didn't we save, James?" James whined, a mournful sound, then barked at nothing, or perhaps, Dave thought, at something only he could feel. That night, Dave sat by James, his loyal partner, and opened Sarah's diary again. He read every page, this time with a pen in hand, circling any name, any landmark, any specific time, searching for a pattern, a hidden clue. One detail, seemingly insignificant at first, began to stand out, a repeated, almost obsessive reference to the house with yellow stairs. He ran it by Lena. There's no address, no street name, no city, just that, over and over, the house with yellow stairs. Lena narrowed her eyes, a flicker of something in her gaze. "That's not much to go on, Dave. Could be anywhere." "James doesn't need much," Dave murmured, his voice laced with a renewed, fierce determination. The next few days were spent driving through the winding rural backroads of the broader region, a silent, relentless hunt. James rode in the front seat now, a privileged partner, his senses more alert than ever, a quiet energy thrumming beneath his fur. They passed countless farms, dilapidated tool sheds, faceless motels. Nothing. Until Thursday morning, Dave had stopped at a gas station for coffee, the rich aroma a temporary comfort. As he emerged, cup in hand, he found James, not in the truck, but standing on the hood, ears forward, body tense, a black silhouette against the rising sun. "What is it, boy?" Dave whispered, his heart leaping. James didn't answer with a bark. He leapt off the hood and ran, a focused streak, towards a nearby property. It was an old ranch house, set back from the road, fenced in, overgrown with weeds, a picture of forgotten decay. And at the front porch, bathed in the soft morning light, were yellow-painted wooden stairs, faded and peeling but undeniably yellow. Dave's stomach dropped, a cold, hard knot. He didn't hesitate. He called it in as a welfare check, a standard code that would get a response without raising alarm bells about his unofficial presence. The deputy who responded was young, unsure, clearly overwhelmed by the quiet vastness of the rural district. Dave waved his suspended badge, his authority now a shadow of what it once was, but his confidence unwavering. "I'll take the lead, son." They knocked 3 times. Silence. The windows were dark, but not broken. Dave circled the dilapidated house, James a silent, watchful shadow at his heels. In the back, tucked away behind an overgrown thicket, was a small, ramshackle shed. James growled the moment the door creaked open, a low, ominous rumble. Inside, there was a worn cot, a rusted bucket, and, chillingly, a heavy lock on the outside of the door. Dave stepped back, the full horror of the discovery settling over him. "This isn't a shed," he murmured, his voice raw. "It's a cage." The town of Harmony Creek, scarred but slowly healing, didn't talk about the full horror of what happened. Not in the sanitized pages of the local newspapers. Not on the carefully curated radio broadcasts. The black SUV, a chilling symbol of hidden evil, had been impounded. 2 more storage sites, more hidden caches of insidious evidence, had been uncovered across state lines, thanks to the files found at the house with yellow stairs. 5 girls, their faces once only shadows in forgotten files, had been rescued in total. One, young Chloe, still hadn't spoken a full sentence since she was found, her trauma too deep for words. Another had begun drawing dogs in every crayon sketch she made, big, comforting figures with gentle eyes and gold badges on their collars, a silent tribute to her unseen savior. Dave didn't want the credit, the accolades, but he wasn't going to forget them. Not any of them. James was slower now. The relentless, unseen work had worn into his bones, a quiet toll on his aging body. He limped more on cold mornings, slept deeper and longer at night, dreaming perhaps of endless trails and happy endings. The once alert, always ready stare had softened around the edges, a gentle weariness replacing the fierce intensity. But if Dave put his boots on, if he so much as opened the truck door, James still rose, still wagged his tail, a quiet, insistent thumping against the floor. He still looked at Dave with that unwavering gaze, saying, "We got more to do, don't we?" Dave, knowing better than to say no, simply drove. One day, a teacher named Hannah from Lincoln Elementary reached out. She'd quietly read about James through a friend of a friend, stories whispered beyond official channels, tales of an extraordinary dog. She wanted to know if he'd come visit her 4th grade class. "They've been talking about bravery," she wrote in her heartfelt email, "but they don't really know what it looks like, not the everyday, quiet kind." Dave said yes. That Friday, James wore his old canine vest, faded, scratched, its once crisp edges softened by countless hours of work, but still strong, still proud. Dave stood in front of 20 wide-eyed kids, perched in plastic chairs, most still finishing their chocolate milk from lunch. He told them about James, not the sensational headlines or the dramatic rescues, but the parts no one saw. He spoke of how James would wait in the dark without flinching, how he could smell fear and follow it to its source, how he never barked unless it truly mattered. "He's not magic," Dave said, his hand resting gently on James's broad back. "He's just a dog who doesn't quit, even when the rest of us want to." A small boy, his face earnest, raised his hand. "Did he ever save you, Officer Miller?" Dave smiled, a soft, genuine warmth spreading through him. "More times than I'll ever be able to count, son." Afterward, the kids came up one by one to pet James, some shy and tentative, others bold and eager. One little girl whispered into his ear as if he were a secret keeper, sharing a hidden thought. Another, with a serious expression, slipped a dog treat into Dave's hand, looking up at him with clear, knowing eyes. "He earned it," she said simply. James took the treat like a gentleman, his tail giving a slow, appreciative thump. That night, Dave sat on his porch, the evening cool, watching the sun sink into the vast wheat fields behind his house. James lay beside him, snoring softly, a picture of profound peace. Dave sipped a cold beer and whispered into the fading light, "We did good, partner, real good." James didn't wake, but his tail tapped twice against the wooden planks, a soft affirmation. A few weeks later, Dave got a call from the governor's office. They wanted to name a new K-9 search and rescue program after James. Dave almost said no, weary of the politics, but Lena talked him into it. "It's not for you, Dave," she argued gently. "It's for the next kid, and the dog that finds them." So Dave agreed, but only on one condition. It wouldn't be a shiny building or a staged press stunt. It would be a fund, one that paid for shelter, dogs rescued just like James once was, to be trained as K-9 support animals for departments that couldn't afford such crucial programs. They called it James Response. In the first year, James Response trained 7 dogs. 4 of them, with their new handlers, found missing children across the Pacific Northwest, bringing them home from the darkest places. 2 were placed in struggling school districts as emotional support animals. offering silent comfort to children grappling with their own hidden traumas. One, too gentle for search work but full of love, was retired early and adopted by a little girl named Leah, the very first child James had ever found on duty years ago. She named her new dog Ranger, a living embodiment of the legacy James had begun. Dave never wore the badge again, but people still called. Detectives, teachers, parents, community leaders. "Can you come talk to our volunteers?" shared James's story. "Would James sit with this girl during her testimony? She trusts him. Would you mind checking something out, Dave? Just a hunch." Dave never charged. He showed up every single time. And one morning, just before Christmas, Dave woke to find James gone from his side. Not missing, not lost, but outside, lying peacefully in the yard, facing the rising sun, his body still, his tail curled around his back legs. Dave knelt beside him for a long, quiet time, saying nothing, his own silent tears mingling with the dew on James's fur. Then, with a profound sense of loss and gratitude, he whispered, "You found your last one, didn't you, boy? You truly found them all." They buried him under the old oak tree beside the house. Neighbors came. So did some of the kids James had helped over the years, now older, taller, their eyes still holding the same soft light when they looked at the empty leash Dave held. Lena placed James's worn canine vest on a chair beneath the tree. Dave didn't give a speech. He just said, his voice thick with emotion, that James never stopped looking. And he never stopped feeling. That was enough. Months passed. Dave built a sturdy bench beneath the oak tree. People, remembering, still left small tokens, toys, fresh flowers, treats in sandwich bags, small handwritten notes. One child, in shaky crayon, had written, "James didn't talk, but I heard him. He showed me." Dave still drove sometimes, still watched playgrounds and dirt roads, still took in the air, his senses attuned, always wondering where the next silent cry for help might come from. He even trained one more dog, a young Labrador, not as sharp, not as fast perhaps, but undeniably eager, with a spark in her eyes that reminded him so much of James. And one day that young dog froze at the sound of a faint, almost imperceptible whimper during a school fire drill. She found a 6-year-old, hidden and locked in a janitor's closet, too scared to yell for help. Dave smiled, a tear tracing a path down his cheek. Perhaps the best of James lived on in instinct, in kindness, in the refusal to ever walk away. Thank you for following this incredible journey with James. From a quiet canine partner to a relentless protector, a lifeline for children in the darkest places, his story reminds us that heroes don't always wear uniforms. Some come on 4 legs, without words, and still manage to say everything. If James's story moved you, if it sparked a flicker of hope or determination within you, please consider sharing it with someone who believes in second chances, in silent strength, and in the unbreakable bond between people and animals. Every like, every share, helps us amplify these crucial stories, helps us ensure that no one feels invisible. And we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a moment when an animal sensed something no one else could? Or perhaps like Dave, have you ever had to fight for what you knew was right, even when the system told you to give up? Tell us your story in the comments below.